Hey, there's no need to call the fire department. She's already here. I'm interviewing Investigator Chick today on this Glassof0J. And yeah, now I'm on a roll. We got a couple videos out now already, and now this is the third one since, or second or third one since the new year. I was on a roll for a bit, Investigator Chick. I was actually publishing videos like one a week, and I was like, yeah, and then I
And then
traveled,
life.
a bunch of things. And by the way, I should probably be a good host and introduce you. So for those in the audience who do not know, this is the wonderful Investigator Chick. I don't know if you go usually by your government or academic name, but
It kind of
it's
varies.
in your book. So Dr. Kathy Ullman, who is the writer of The Active Defender, available in fine bookstores everywhere.
Yes, and eBook and all the things. So,
Absolutely. So one of the things I mean, you're a friend of mine. We've known each other for, gosh, how long have we known each other now?
quite a
Five,
number of
six,
years.
6 or 7
Yeah,
years now.
yeah,
Um,
easily.
yeah, and we've spoken at each other's conferences and talked, and just done different things. But one of the awesome things, when you were talking last year about, hey, I wrote a book, and it's coming out soon. I was just like, you wrote a book? Oh, cool! I've got to read this. And it was called, it's called The Active Defender: Immersion in the Offensive Security Mindset. Give us a little soundbite, if you will, of like what's the overall goal there you're trying to do with the book.
Yeah, so it's kind of the book I wish it had been out when I first got to be active in security. There's a lot of information that I didn't know that I wish I had known. So it's really my attempt to kind of give back to this community that has given me so much. And in a nutshell, it's looking at defense from the offensive security perspective. And there's so many people, and I was one of them, who are in the defensive side who know very little, if anything, about the fact that offensive security exists. Some people will know because they're required to have like a pen test or some kind of engagement because requirements, any sort of PCI or whatever, there are these kinds of things that may involve an offset group. But there's lots and lots and lots of folks doing defense, whether or not they even realize they're doing defense, right? Because your basic sysadmin is doing defense, and if they're not, they should be. And they may not realize, I certainly didn't, that there was even this offensive security thing at all. I didn't realize it was a thing. I didn't know anything about it. And the more I learned about it, the more intrigued I became. Ultimately, I think it's made me a better defender. And that's really what led to writing the book. And so, in a nutshell, that's the concept behind it.
See, and it's funny because the way I got into infosec was actually more because I wanted to be a hacker. When I saw the movie
Sure.
Hackers and I saw stuff like that, I'm like, I want to be a hacker, but I don't think there's a way to do that. And then as I'm going through college at the help desk, I was working at the help desk in college. I was really starting to understand what DEF CON was, and different hacker conferences, and these tools. There's tools available. I'm not going to get in trouble for using them. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But how do I do that? So I've always come at it from that angle anyway. So
Sure.
it's very interesting to see someone who's come at it in your career from the other side, which is defense, and then I think
Yeah.
this light bulb just hits, right?
Yeah, and I think too, right? Like, I'm from a generation where we started without real computing the way we think of it now.
Yeah.
So, and I had computing at my home at a time when nobody had computing in their home. That was not a thing. So while a lot of folks, I had some fabulous conversations with friends as I was building this book. And in fact, Grifter and I had a phenomenal discussion about freaking and talking about why he was freaking and what he was trying to do. And I thought, it's funny because those are all things I wanted to do too, except I didn't have to freak because I had access to all these systems legally at my fingertips. And so I think, like I came at this in I came at the same technology, but from a very different perspective, only because I didn't have to like freak to get to bulletin boards or to access things that cost money for most people because I had this strange connectivity that most people just didn't start with. So my hacking was more about hacking. um, so I was using computers for like hacking mental health things, which
Mm.
I didn't even necessarily realize until I was older. But like, I would do it to communicate with somebody who maybe I wasn't allowed to really be communicating with, kind of
Mm.
thing, and which ultimately was a very good thing. But it meant that it was something. So it was something I wasn't supposed to do, right? But at the same time, like it was good for my mental health to do it. Um,
You know what's really
so
interesting is, you talk about freaking. We're now in another age of technology where even people who are really skilled in infosec are going to be, what the heck's freaking?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
VoIP has been around for quite a
A
while
long
now.
time now. Yeah.
And now what's freaking? What's a Captain Crunch whistle? What does that have to do with it? What
Yep.
2600? What's that? A
Yep.
blue box? What are you talking about?
Yeah. And like I said, what was weird for me was that I grew up in that same time frame, but didn't know about any of that. Didn't know about
Mhm.
2600. Didn't know about
Right.
the whistle because I didn't need that kind of access to do what I wanted to do.
Right.
And that was just this weird, like having these conversations now with friends and colleagues who talk about, yeah, I remember when we did this. And I'm like, yeah, I did that. Yeah, but here's how I had to get to it. Oh, I didn't have to do that. you
Yeah.
know, it's 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 a very weird space. But it's cool in that I think that's how I've connected to some folks. I the very first time I heard Jeff Mann speak, for example, he was talking about those early days, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that, right? And and Jeff's older than I am, and I think he was very surprised that like I knew those things. And but we had a fabulous conversation afterwards, talking about those early days. So so
Yeah.
yeah,
And so I think we kind of touched on like what made you want to write it, to begin with, right? It's the thing that you wish you would have had this,
yeah,
and so, but as you're writing it, of course, then I'm sure you did a lot of research into the book, right?
sure,
This wasn't just you brain dumping. This was also you going, ooh, but you're going to learn things yourself along the way, as any good book
absolutely.
should be. So like, was there anything that surprised you while you were researching for this book?
I don't know if anything really surprised me. It was there were some significant challenges.
Mm,
So, this is definitely not something that I did on my own. I joke in the beginning about how, there's this saying about taking a village to raise a child. Well, it took a hacker community to write a book, right? Because I didn't do
yeah.
this by myself. I definitely had to reach out and really rely on many of my friends who were in spaces that I'm not, to be able to bring some of these topics and make them as thorough as possible. In particular, the chapter on detections, right? That is not an area where I specialize. But I had some absolutely fabulous help and relied pretty heavily on Jared Atkinson's work, and he was very gracious. He spent hours chatting with me, about that topic. And, between reading his blog posts and talking to him directly, and my husband was helpful with that chapter too, because he's a developer. And so he understands things in some ways that I don't. So it was definitely, I wouldn't say there was a surprise, but um, I think I was just grateful that I had the community support for all of these spaces to be able to, when I got to a section where I was like, okay, I need to write something about this that I don't necessarily know as well, that there were folks I could reach out to and go, okay, who do I know that is specializes in this,
Yeah.
so I can make sure, that I get the verbiage right. And in the very beginning, where I spent a lot of time sort of flushing out terminology, Evil Mog and I spent a lot of time going back and forth because, I know how I've heard things referred to, but he works in the OffSec space. That is his bread
Yes.
and butter. And he was very aware of how things are talked about and what is appropriate and what would piss the community off in ways that there's no way I would have known. So he was, incredibly helpful with that. So when we started talking about the business of pen testing and red teaming and all of those things, um, he was just absolutely an amazing resource. And part of those conversations are why I decided to take the step back that I did and focus on this idea of offense and defense and not get into the colors, right? And not fall down that particular rabbit hole, because that just muddies the waters.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I just peeked at your acknowledgement section in there. I was like, oh man, a lot of people I know, and it's like I need to know these people now. Um, yeah, I mean that's the thing I always fear about if I ever write a book. Like I need to know everything I'm writing about, and
Nah.
like you know about it, but like when you're gonna write about it, you really want to get someone who this is the thing they do in and out. You really want to have help
Yeah.
from them, right?
Well, and I have to say, I mean, so that's where Jake Williams was
Yeah.
just a godsend. So he, I had approached him with sort of the concept of the book and an outline. As I had done, I talked to a handful of people, who I mentioned the book, him and Grifter and several others, and said, I have this idea. Is it worth pursuing? And Jake's response was, you have to write this book and you have to let me write the forward. And I was like, wow, I guess I'm writing a book now. And then, I reached out to him and I said, would you be willing to be the technical editor? And he said, yeah, I think I could do that. And so, he
Nice.
that was massively helpful, because when I went sideways on a topic, he'd be like, no, no, this is totally not quite right. Like, here's the nuance of what you need to know. And he's one of the folks that I think understands both sides equally well, because he's done both offense and defense for a long time, and that was super helpful. So yeah, it's definitely not about knowing it all yourself, but it is definitely about knowing who can help fill those gaps in as you're working through it.
Yeah, no, no doubt. So I mean, suffice to say, you learned a lot during this
I
book.
did, I did.
And was there anything that you learned in the book that you brought back to work? That you brought back and said, "Hey, oh wow, that's cool. I need to start doing that in where I work."
Yeah, so I can't say that I directly brought this back, but there had been some conversations about like canaries and some of that type of technology. And I was always for it, but the more I worked on this, the more of those kinds of things that I thought would be really, really welcome in our environment ultimately, because they're so easy to implement and you can do many of them for free,
Right.
right? They take like very little in terms of time to implement. They're not going to be a bother to your infrastructure or to anyone who's doing support or any of your system.
Doesn't hurt
Like,
the usability of your system at all.
no, it
Doesn't
doesn't.
impact
And
the
it
user experience.
exactly, and it's such a tiny thing that can be such a great resource. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that don't impact the user experience that it's like, when you see those changes happen, someone's in your environment, right?
yeah,
you know and to kind of promote a little bit more of the understanding of this book a little bit is, again, having that attacker mindset now gets you to where you can start thinking about, so once an attacker does get in, how do I entice them to take routes that
yep,
will make them very noisy because they want to
yep,
stay quiet. So how do I make them noisy without necessarily, bogging down the rest of my operations? Logistics is very important in warfare, but there are so many things that the military does in warfare that doesn't hurt their logistics that ends up slowing the enemy down, right?
yeah, yep,
And sometimes that's what you want to do. If an attacker can get in and smash and grab in like a couple hours and be out and have taken down your company, have something that within the first 5 minutes, your SOC is immediately going to be aware, yeah, someone's in here. Let's disable the account. Bam. Now they're
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, and I think too it's sort of nice now because I can't tell you how many times I'll have a conversation with, my supervisor or someone in my department where I'll say, "You should really take a look at chapter 4," because I don't have to re-explain it. It's right there.
Yeah.
And we just did an engagement with our IR partner, and that was the first time we've ever done an engagement of this nature, and it was really cool because I understood so much more than I might have before I wrote the book, in terms of what they were doing and what was expected, and that's been just invaluable. I sat in a talk today, um, that Q from Blue Bastion gave. He gave the same talk at B-Sides Rochester, but I didn't have time to watch it. Um, and he's talking about some of these tools and how you can make their lives as offensive security people more difficult, right? So, and slowing them down. And I'm sitting through the whole talk and I'm nodding and I'm sort of chuckling, but it's all because of the research and the things that I had to learn to write the book. And
Yeah.
I have a slide even in the talk that I gave. Um, that essentially is about this book, about, here's a list of tools, right? If you've never heard of these tools, go research them. It doesn't mean you have to be experts, it doesn't mean you have to know
Right.
everything about them, but the stories that scare me are the ones where people say, what's a mimi cats. They don't know
Yeah.
what that is, and for folks who don't know, it's a password stealer, and there I have heard legitimate stories of situations where sysadmins have seen that word in their defender logs, and they go, "I don't know what that is. It can't be a big deal," and they just they let it go. Like, I mean, and it may or may not be blocked, but knowing what I know about OffSec, okay, you've tried to deploy a tool like Mimikatz, it's been blocked. Well, then you're going to try to come from another side, right? We make assumptions as defenders all the time, bad assumptions,
Hmm.
because we don't understand how attackers are thinking and how they're acting. But our OffSec counterparts absolutely understand that because that's what they're mimicking.
Yeah.
So,
And,
getting to
and
know these folks is huge.
and assuming breach from a defender standpoint is so important, right? And that's, you start getting into zero trust and other things, but assume breach, is not assuming, oh, no alarms are going off, we're okay. Assuming
Right.
breach now starts meaning, okay, I've got my defenses in place, we've got alerts and stuff, but how do I find the bad guy in my environment that I assume is in here?
Yep,
Yeah, I think
and
you have
what
a
do I
section
start
about
looking
threat
for?
hunting, right?
Yep,
Yeah, and there's like a whole process. It's very scientific in methodology. It's, you have a hypothesis. Here an attacker is doing these things in our environment. Okay,
yeah,
how do you test for that? And
right,
you go through and you look for that evidence. And
yep,
if you can't find that evidence, okay, it does not appear. You can't conclude they're not in there, but it does not
correct,
appear that they're in here. Let's formulate another hypothesis and let's
right,
look for them in there. And so
right.
you're constantly just kind of formulating more hypotheses. And even then, you're automating those hypotheses to say, hey, suck, if you ever see these things as true, though, come get me, because that probably means someone's doing something bad.
Yeah, and I think, there have been a lot of books written about threat hunting that are not there's nothing wrong with them. There's some really good, very, uh, foundational texts about that subject,
Hmm.
but they're very much tied to frameworks and very specific ways to do this. And one of the things I try to bring out in this book is, look, we do threat hunting trying to cross the street every day. This does not have to be
Yeah.
at that level, right? And Grifter did a great talk during COVID where he talked about this. He's like, look, this whole idea of it's just a hypothesis. You just have a question. You start with a question. Like, this does not, and you don't have to have, like, people assume, well, you have to have a sim and you have to have like a million logs. No, you have to have a thing with logs of something that you
Mhm.
might see stuff in. That's all you need. It could be a single system. It doesn't have to be complicated. And, and that's some of what I try to get across here. Anything where you can look for that activity is good enough. And there's no magic to this. It's, we make those decisions daily, whether it's crossing the street or, I mean, even sometimes sending an email, right? We have to think carefully about, are we actually going to send this? Do we want our thoughts actually going out in the world?
Every
So
time
this
I've
is
ever BCC'd a bunch of people on an email and everything and just been like, I have them in BCC. I have it coming from here. Okay,
Yep,
send. And then those are always the most stressful moments. Like, did I send it? Did I accidentally put it in CC?
right.
Put me in there too, just to make sure I did it right. Test it first, like, because I don't
Yep,
BCC people very often, but sometimes when I do, I'm like, I don't want to make people angry at me now that I just exposed
yes.
their email address to everybody.
Yep. I go through that every time I'm doing, when I'm doing B-Sides Rochester, like, talk acceptance, right? I
Oh,
try to
yes.
I try to BCC everybody that needs to get the message without putting all their email addresses
Yeah.
in the CC field. So,
That's
yeah.
exactly the context I've done it a few times. So it's like, yeah,
Exactly.
let's not do that. So, if you had to take like, three things, it sounds like, deception technology, especially like canaries or tokens, honey
Right.
tokens, honey files, things like that, very easy
Yep.
to put out there. But like, give me two other good takeaways from the book. Like, if you want someone to just have two more things that they just go put out right now or go learn about right now, what are the things that they need to read your book to see and go learn more about?
So I think the number one thing really is that there is this thing called offensive security, right?
Mm.
And the point of offensive security, and it's not somehow to attack us, because there is, I mean, there are companies that are jerks that way, but generally speaking, their job is to test what we have in place and help us be better at what we do, and to realize that we're kind of all in this together. So I would say that is probably number one takeaway. Like, understand that there is this whole other thing that you need to understand to be a better defender. Like, that's without a doubt. And I think the other thing is that, frankly, we make assumptions because we don't understand those things, right? So
Mhm.
it's understanding the basic way an OffSec engagement and hence an attacker, um, thinks through the problem, because they're thinking about it the context of relationships. And the talk that I did last, about the book, this is one of the key points I tried to bring out. Attackers think in the terms of relationships, right?
Mhm.
And if if you're a typical defender, you're thinking in terms of your individual systems, perhaps, and your firewalls and your individual defenses. You're not thinking necessarily about, if I land here, what is the relationship between the thing I land on and the thing I want to get to? And
Right.
that is everything the OffSec person is thinking about. That is ultimately, they don't, there's this misconception, oh, we just have to get domain admin. But that's not always the goal, right?
Not
What
always.
are they actually tasked with doing? And it's always about relationships. So I would say the other thing is to understand that the way OffSec folks think about all of this is in relationships. And all the things that are in this book kind of point to how all of that works, right? What those relationships look like. And so that's why understanding the hacker mindset, which helps you be more agile as a defender, is so important.
Mhm. Absolutely. And so obviously we have a lot in infosec hacking we can talk about, but You know, uh, I would say you and I are both probably everyone's unique because no one's the same 100%. But I would say we're fairly unique individuals in our own way. As Mr. Rogers would say, you're a little fancy, I'm a little fancy, right? In our own ways. And so one of the things that's interesting is, I think in the past probably 4 years, I felt like I can actually bring my whole self to work. um, I started in IT about 13 years ago. Um, 2009. So I mean, already a lot more loose and permissive, laid back work cultures and stuff like that. Especially when I started off in a college, but I also felt myself more comfortable to bring my whole self to work, not like you could do back in the 80s. Like I mean, the 80s were very stern culture, and you need to be
Yep.
this way, and don't go out looking like that. People will make fun of you. You'll be weird, and you want to fit in. And everybody was always about fitting in, fitting in, fitting in. And now we all fit in, but because we celebrate ourselves and each other, and that's how we fit in, is we fit in because we're so different. It seems kind of weird now, but like I like bringing my whole self to work. I like bringing the nerdy stuff. I know you have a couple things that are unique about you for sure, and I'm sure you have many others. But it's just like, how do you find, like, for instance, the two big things I always associate with you are dead things and firefighting. Like, how do you bring those types of things to work, and how does that give you a perspective on infosec that no one else can bring to work?
So I'll start with the firefighting thing, because to me that's kind of the most obvious, and I've actually done an IR firefighting talk that touches on some of this.
Yep.
So, um, I think I was very, very fortunate. So our security office was born in 2006. I started doing work for them in '07, '08, was brought on full time in '09. I had been doing IT for over 10 years at that point in various capacities. But the man who was the information security officer when they started that had an emergency management background.
Mhm.
He was on ski patrol, and just in general, he'd come out of the Coast Guard at one point, so he really understood what true emergencies were from a life and death perspective, right? So he taught me very early on in the role that I was in the university. Look, we don't save lives here. That is not our job. When you are firefighting, if when you are literally doing that job, that is a life safety thing, right? We are here to save lives, and that is your focus. But our job, generally speaking, in the infosec world, in our space, is not life and death most of the time.
Yeah, most.
So don't treat the potential breach or problem like that as if it were a life safety issue. They are so not the same thing. And that has definitely been a guiding principle that I have had since day one. And, it was nice because he and I could commiserate on the actual side of things, right? If I had been at a fire where, we'd had something really serious happen, or some call where there was you know loss of life or serious injury, I could commiserate with him, which was fabulous because those are the kinds of things that you can't always talk about with your coworkers when you work in the IT space. um, but it definitely allowed me to have perspective, and to have the kind of perspective that I have tried to impart to my colleagues as we have grown the office and moved into it, because I'm the only person left from that original team. And I've learned a lot from being a firefighter and going into emergency situations. One of my favorite things is slow is fast, right? You need to be very
Uh,
deliberate about what you do, and not taking a beat, not taking that moment and just running in can be, even in an IR situation that has absolutely nothing directly to do with this, can be life or death, in the sense that, what if your IR situation, and I had a picture for one of my talks that has, like, the server room has asbestos in it, and there's tape, right? And you've been notified, like, there's a serious incident going on in the server room. Maybe it's something like you've got water pouring from the ceiling or whatever. Are you going to go running in there? Seriously? You're going to go just running in there? Like, you literally it could be a life safety risk.
I ran into
Um,
a radiation lab one time where they were like doing radiation testing on certain things on plants and other stuff like that. And I didn't go running in. I got labbed up. I suited up and everything, but
yeah.
like I was just like, that machine is like freaking out. Like, get me in there right now, and I don't care what the regulations are, whatever, get me in there right now, and everything. Looking back on it, yeah, it could wait. It
Yeah.
literally could have waited,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
we could have taken some other methods and everything. But hey, I got the Geiger counter on me afterwards. They were like, which actually that's great. Everyone thinks they
Yeah.
is really fast. No, 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 that's slow. The solid tone is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think understanding those kinds of things, generally speaking, not getting tunnel vision, right? How easy it to just get hyper
Yes.
focused. Litmoose did a great talk, a choose your own adventure talk at ShmooCon a number of years ago. It was the year I got to meet her. And it was, is this ransomware? Like the assumption was it was ransomware, and it turned out that initially it wasn't actually ransomware, and so people were like panicking. And I give an example of that kind of thing too. Like, just because Houston we have a problem doesn't necessarily mean like, oh crap, the end of the world is coming.
Right.
I've dealt with issues where another organization was breached, and we have people who have creds that were compromised, but they weren't compromised in our systems.
Right.
They just had the same password because people make poor decisions about that kind of thing. And I had a supervisor at the time who was just losing his mind. Like, we're going to have to notify, and we're going to have to, like, stop, time out. First of all, we don't in
Not our
our
incident, first of all.
space. Yeah, it's not our incident, number one, and number two, we can't even call something an incident until we talk to counsel. They decide whether it's an incident or not
Gotcha.
us.
Yeah.
And that's a really tough thing for somebody who wants to just barrel in and go, hog wild. So, I really think that in particular has been extraordinarily useful in the security field, is just understanding that perspective, and really and realizing we can take a moment to take that 360 and really think about the bigger picture. Because we're shown as firefighters, we're always shown these fabulous pictures of what appears to be, let's say, a 1.5-story house, right?
Mhm.
And what you're supposed to do as a firefighter is you're supposed to do what's called a 360. So you literally go around the building and get a feel. You either drive past it so you see at least three sides, or somebody goes around the building and says, "Here's what we have." And so they'll show a picture of what looks like a story and a half house, and they'll ask, "What do you see?" And people say, "Oh, it's a story and a half. There's flames coming out the upstairs window." And then they show the back of the house, and there's actually a story below because it's on a hill. And so there's actually a whole story to this house, and the
Yeah.
fire actually starts. You can see like the flames coming up from, that first floor that's almost underground. And that's actually what the flames are that you see coming up to the top of the building. So, if you're not taking a wider view of the problem
Mhm.
in an IR space, you're probably missing something. So all of
Yeah.
these little things have been just incredibly invaluable
Yeah,
to
if you
me.
think it just started last week, it maybe didn't start just last week, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It may have been there for a while, and you gotta go
Yes.
back and start saying, like, "How do we know this is the first time they've been
Yeah.
here? And how do we know this is the root cause?"
Well,
And
and
getting to
that's
that.
another thing too, right? So I did fire investigation for a number of years as a firefighter as well, and this is a parallel I like to draw because fire investigators look for the origin and the cause of a fire, right? And until you find the origin point, you can't find the cause. Well, that's no different than what we do in IR, and we're often so quick to remediate that it becomes impossible to find the
Correct.
origin and the cause, and that's a problem.
"Oh, yeah, we
And
deleted this. Could you please save a copy of it?" Could you
right,
did did you do that? Like, "That
right,
email, I got rid of it. Can we please restore it? Because
yes,
we need to know the link that was in that or the
yep,
attachment that was in that.
yep,
We gotta figure out if it's been anywhere else, you know?"
yeah. And and some of the fancy systems that exist now help facilitate some of that,
Yeah.
right? But you're not always in an environment where you have access to
No.
those tools. So yeah, it's that's absolutely been key. Um, I how does I don't know exactly how the dead things has has had an impact, aside from the fact that I find fascinating learning about people who are no longer alive that people may not know about, and death cultures and that kind of thing. And I think I guess the way that perhaps that's useful in sort of an indirect sense is you learn a lot more about people and different cultures and different thought processes,
Mm,
and that just helps to make you, more worldly and
yeah.
able to deal with different kinds of folks.
And it's
Um,
subtle, it's the little subtle things that you now pick up on that
right.
you can't it's really hard to just describe it in an interview. It's just like,
Yeah. Yeah. I
you
mean,
just
they're
get
they're
these
cultural.
intuitions now
Yeah.
because you've made those connections.
Yeah. Yeah, and my coworkers, I've been at the university now 24 years. So my coworkers know I'm a little weird. And they're pretty good with that, thankfully.
Yeah. I mean,
So
so that's the thing we share in common. Like I had a little bit of higher ed experience. I was there for 5 years. Had help desk, and then I ended up being a security engineer for a couple of years. Largest what was it? It was the largest brick and mortar higher ed in the nation at the time,
mhm.
160,000 students.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
huge.
yeah, it's huge. I don't think it holds that rank now. University of Phoenix, I think, was the largest because online and
Right,
definitely
sure.
by 2009, online colleges had definitely been taking off, and
Yeah.
so and they were kind of like one of the first big ones that I saw a lot of advertisements about and things.
Yep.
Taking care of 160,000 students or whatever, 5,000 faculty members and administrative people also, and um, oh, by the way, you're state funded, and your governor just said, "Oh yeah, 2% pay, 2% cut of all budgets across, and
Yep.
regardless of anything, no waivers." And it's just like, how do we do things on a shoestring? How do we don't even have a shoestring. We're on the threads of the shoestring. It's been frayed out there. And like, how do you do infosec for that all? And then, of course, I think you and I were talking about, academic freedom is a big thing in many places. Like,
Yes.
oh no, you can't do that. We got to be able to look at nudity because
Yep.
um, anatomy and other
Because
things.
people anatomy and I mean, so University of Buffalo is what's considered an R1 research institution. We
Mhm.
literally research all the things, right? And that includes topics like pornography.
Yeah.
So, unlike your traditional environment where you can do things like you can put restrictions in for web things and you can do more monitoring, we can't do that. And there's also, it's this weird dichotomy because on the one hand, academic freedom, but there's this sort of almost weird sense of privacy issues, right?
Mhm.
There's this deep-seated fear that we're watching them, this big brother thing, which I think is hysterical because I started in a security office of 3 people. Really, like we
I'm
have
watching
we
you.
have
Yes.
40,000 people and like a bazillion account. Really? You think I'm reading your email? Like who would have time for that? But it is an interesting balancing act because on the one hand, you have to be able to say when you see something that's not right,
Yeah.
we need to delve into this without people feeling like, they're
Yeah.
they're being invaded somehow. And
I didn't watch you download Game of Thrones
right.
from a torrent.
Yep.
Game of Thrones watched you download Game of Thrones and then complain to our
Yes.
ISP about it, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, we are effectively our own ISP, so we get those
Yeah,
complaints directly, and that is part of my job is dealing with DMCA complaints
yeah.
and having to explain to
I had
folks.
to automate that.
Well, it's mostly automated. So the initial complaint comes in and automatically generates a ticket, and our network operations folks send back. They manually do a reply to whoever sends it, saying we received it because you have to reply within a certain period of time legally. And then they enroll somebody in a course that we have.
Mm,
But we do occasionally get repeat offenders who don't understand. Like, I did not download this thing. Okay, that's not why you were flagged. You were flagged because you were sharing the illegal thing, and the company that made it could see you sharing it.
yeah,
That's not you downloading it. That's you sharing it.
yeah.
And having to explain to them like, look, they told us all we did was go, this IP address is tied to this MAC address, and we know that MAC address is registered to you. if you weren't the one using the device, well, that's not our problem. That's a whole other policy issue.
Yeah.
But
I think we
I
ended up
digress.
I think I ended up doing a thing because 'cause they'd give us a public IP timestamp of the thing. So I
Yep.
automated like a Splunk query that as soon as those come in, Splunk query would pop those values in at the time, give or take an hour, and then find if it couldn't find just one, it found like 3, but it would basically see like, "Oh, here's that IP address to a private IP address, which was on this Wi-Fi that at that time was registered to this MAC address,
Yep.
and this student had logged in," and then it turns into a, automatic if we find that, then it's an automatic email to whoever that student's chancellor of student affairs or whatever was. And
Yeah.
then it's like, hey, by the way, here's our DMCA notice and everything. It is against the student handbook right there.
Yep.
You're going to have a conversation with them. That's now up to you, not me.
Yep.
So
Yeah. I mean,
pass the potato.
we used to have a computer discipline office, and we had a human that like
Oh, okay.
spoke softly and carried a big stick, or in some cases spoke very loudly and still carried the big stick. Um, but a number of years ago, thankfully, that whole office went away, and so the way we handle it is individuals essentially get two strikes. The first time they have to take this course and pass an exam,
Mhm.
and take the material off. And if they never get another one, okay, they've learned. If they get a second one, they basically get a final notice, and if they get a
Mm.
third one, then they get shipped off
Wow.
to have to speak to a human, and it gets ugly, and it's not my problem at that point. I
Right.
just send it off to, but we don't do judiciary work. That is something
No,
I
absolutely.
never, ever, ever wanted to do, and thankfully, a number of bosses ago decided, yeah, we're not going to have a computer discipline office anymore, and I was
Yeah.
like, yay, because I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah,
So,
that's the thing I tell people. It's like, you're not the police. You're
right,
not here to do a lot of this stuff.
right,
Um, like you said, it's not an incident until legal says it is, right?
right.
And in your organization, and it's like
Yep.
understanding what your role really is, staying in your lane.
Yeah.
And honestly, DMC notices honestly distract you from the real work we need to do, right?
Yeah,
And
and I do work with law enforcement. I am the point of contact for law enforcement in instances where data needs to be retrieved for various reasons.
yeah,
And I love doing those cases because there's some real
yes,
feel good fuzzies when the investigator calls you up and says, "Yep, we caught them, and they're being prosecuted now."
yeah,
And or the flip side is we had an actual life safety issue because,
mm,
like I said, most of the time it's not, but we do
yeah.
occasionally have those, and you get the phone call that says we found them, the person's okay.
Oh, good.
And in part because of some research that I've done. So, um, those are where law enforcement, I work with them, and that comes in handy. And
Yeah.
I've done a number of cases with them, and some of them are just amazing. Like we had one that went on for like 18 months. It was
Oh,
crazy, but they got the indictment in the end. So
hey. But yeah, knowing your purpose in InfoSec is very important, right?
it
No matter
is,
where you are, because if you're in
yeah,
life sciences or higher ed or manufacturing or whatever, your purpose is different there. InfoSec is not infos. I mean, at one K in one respect, we're all using the same tools for the
right,
most part, right? We're all doing the same concepts. You can read the CISM, CISSP. We've all got the same tactics or strategies or standards that we're trying to put in different places. And but really it looks different because there's our purpose is different in different places. And
yeah,
I think this kind of just goes into a spicy take I think you have for this. I asked you for a spicy take and I think you have a
yeah.
spicy take for us.
So, but I will preface this with, this is not my personal
True. Yes.
spicy take. I got this from Wolf, um, and he is known for saying something akin to what I will say, and I agree with this statement. um, and that is, we're often asked, like, what is the purpose of the security office, and a lot of people's answer is, we're here to keep the data secure in some capacity. And Wolf says, no, the reason why we're here is keep the business going, because if something happens, if something goes horribly sideways with security, the business will not continue to function. And if the business doesn't function, then what's the point of any of this, right?
Right.
So understanding what the goal of and the business processes of your organization are, and understanding that the point of security is to facilitate all of that ultimately in the most secure way possible, uh, that's key. And I think we lose sight of that when we get hyper focused on the data itself. And so I tend to agree very strongly with him. And I know there are folks that won't agree with that, but I think that, it kind of leads back to what I've learned from firefighting, right? You got to take that step back and you have to realize, like, what you're trying to do is help the business keep going, in a secure manner, but it's the purpose is ultimately that business. And for us, it's education and keeping students able to take classes and do research and whatever else. And if we don't do that successfully and something goes horribly wrong, then that goal cannot be realized. So that's really the point,
So I
no
went
matter
to
what our roles are.
yeah, I went to the dojo today, and there was a guest who'd come in and was observing a class. Was interested in coming and studying with us martial arts. I do Japanese swordsmanship, and we ended up having lunch with him afterwards. We usually go to a lunch spot afterwards. And so we went to lunch and he came along with us and it was really cool. He's a security guard and he's actually right now pulling a 12-hour shift at a UPS facility. And I was like, "Oh, cool! Like, so what are you doing there?" And it's just like, "Oh yeah, I stop thieves from stealing catalytic converters
Yeah.
out of the UPS trucks." And I'm just thinking about what you were saying there. It makes me think he's not there to stop thieves from, taking catalytic converters out. He's making sure that deliveries can be made tomorrow, that
Yes.
UPS
So the
still does its job,
Yes,
because no
exactly.
catalytic converter, you're not going to get that truck out of the lot.
Right, exactly, and then the business grinds to a halt, and,
Exactly.
and so again, it's that you gotta take that step back and see it in for the bigger picture that it really is,
Yeah.
and I think that's sometimes where a lot of security folks kind of lose focus because they don't they're so busy trying to solve the technical problems, they're not looking at what the business is doing.
Yeah.
I mean, a huge chunk of my job is somebody asking me for a way to do something, and they want to know, is this okay? And most of the time it's, well, let's make this modification because the goal is still to do whatever it is they're trying to do.
Right.
But the example that I frequently give is, we had a group that needed to share some information with a health insurance company, which is not terribly surprising given that we're a research institution. And they wanted to create a folder in our environment and give access to this outside entity, this insurance company. And so I call them up, which we don't typically allow in the way they were asking, especially for this kind of data. So I called them up and I asked them, like, tell me more about this process. Like, what exactly are you trying to do? And what came out was, it was a one-way share. They needed to get information to this other entity. And I said, "Well, why doesn't the other entity get data from other places?" "Gee, I don't know." "Why don't you find out if there's a way we can upload that data
Yeah.
securely to them?"
Yeah.
And sure enough, of course there was a way to do that, and that entity was doing this all the time. Voila, now I have mitigated a risk for us in a very simple way using a 10-minute conversation, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is a
Because that
huge part
insurance
of what I
company
do.
doesn't care how you get the data to them.
Nope.
They're just like,
It
"Hey, get the data to us." And
Right,
that's
and
that's the thing,
yeah,
a lot of
exactly.
regulators are like that, where regulators, you do the same thing with them and you don't change it because you're afraid something bad will happen. And you have a conversation with someone saying, "Oh, well, we've got to have USB, unencrypted USB hard drives or thumb drives to give to, some regulatory." And I'm just like, does it have to be that way? Where is it in the law or the regulation that says you will do this? Do
Right,
they not have some other means of taking care of this?
right.
No. And I'm like, have you asked them? Well, no, you're making an assumption. Let's ask
Mhm.
them. Let's have a conversation. Like, I'm
Yep,
going to allow this now because you obviously need to do it now, but like,
right.
let's have a conversation.
Yes.
Because they deal with lots of businesses and lots of things I'm sure
Exactly.
this is not the most efficient way for them to handle it anyway.
But
But,
it's,
it's also the government, so
yeah,
I wouldn't say
but
they're the
knowing
most
your
efficient
business,
at anything.
knowing the processes,
Yeah.
understanding those processes just facilitates all of that so
E
much
yeah,
better.
exactly. When you know what business you're in, again, it really connects you to that. Here's why we're doing what we're doing, and
Yes.
here's why we're in business, and here's what we're trying to do. And, constantly aligning, at my level, and I guess at your level too, you really think strategically. I mean, it really does get down to putting vision, mission, goals on a slide deck and building. Okay, what are we going to do this year? And what am I here to do to support that? Someone told me, it was my first security manager told me, brakes on a car, what do they do? And I said, they allow you to stop quickly when you need to. He's like, no, they don't. I'm like, what? He's like, good brakes on a car allow you to go really fast safely.
Yeah.
And I was like, huh, let's make this car drift, and
Yeah.
take those tight corners and be drifting,
Yeah.
and it's just like, it's not meant to stop. It's meant to go really fast, really safely.
Yep.
And I was like,
Yep.
that is amazing. You're still going to get from point A to point B. We just have some airbags and, other things to make sure you get there safely.
Yep, absolutely. And though I will say that, thankfully the vision mission piece is one step higher than me, thankfully. So
Ah.
I don't have to create those slide decks. My stuff tends to be a little more, why do we care about
Tactical.
this?
Yeah.
Talking about it at a more tactical level. So I'm guiding those conversations in that way, with my boss, then translating that for the C level executive folks. And thankfully, he comes from a technical background, and he's still technical enough that, I can do some of the translating for him, and he can
Yeah.
then take it the rest of the way. So
That's fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and thinking about what we came here to do today, I came here to interview a good friend,
Mhm.
and to spread more awareness, because I liked this book. I mean, I guess
Thank
endorsed
you.
by OJ. I liked this book. I still read it and kind of go like, yeah, was there anything else in that section? I want to go read, reference it. It's now a reference book, and I've got it tabbed up for all my reference needs. And I had some of my colleagues buy it to make sure. I'm like, we're going to do some of the things in this book, like let's make an active defender multi-phase project here.
Yeah.
As like, it's very important, I think, to the strategy here. So yeah, the more I can spread awareness about this and help, and of course getting the person who wrote the book is always important there. So I want to thank you so much for jumping on with me,
Oh, my
and
pleasure.
we've been here for almost an hour, and yeah, it's been a fantastic pleasure. And you know
Likewise.
yeah, absolutely. And that'll be it for this glass of OJ. What did you think? Did you have any other thoughts on this book and this idea of active defense, or any of the other things we talked about? Do you like dead things too? uh, how do you bring yourself to work, right? What's your spicy takes? We want to see them down in the comments. We'll see them on social media, and I will catch you in the next one.